He broke 3 of her ribs. That was the text that changed everything. It was meant for her brother. A desperate plea typed on a shattered screen on a bathroom floor that smelled of mildew and cheap bleach. But through cracked glass and fingers slick with blood, Lenora Bellamy typed one wrong digit. She didn't text her family. She
Stay
didn't
with
text
me.
the police.
Breathe.
She texted a number that hadn't belonged
have
to a
to.
living
Hold
person
on.
for over 200 years. She texted
Heart rate
the
is
man
still
who owned the
180.
night.
Increasing
And
the
when the
dosage
reply
now.
came back
Pressure is
exactly
stabilizing.
3 minutes later,
Good. It's coming
I'm
down.
on my way. She didn't know if she had just been saved or if she had summoned something far worse than the monster standing outside the bathroom door. This is the story of how one wrong number rewrote the fate of a waitress, a king, and an entire city buried beneath the skin of the world. And it begins as most tragedies do, with a woman walking home alone. The smell hit her first. Stale beer, old grease, something sour underneath it all, like meat left out too long on a counter. Lenora Bellamy unlocked the door to apartment 4B at 2 in the morning. Her feet throbbed in her non-slip waitress shoes, a dull, rhythmic ache that had become the metronome of her life. 12 hours on her feet, 2 double shifts back to back because Carla called in sick again, and Jerry never said no to a customer, even when his only waitress was swaying on her feet like a reed in a storm. She was 26 years old. She had once been a nursing student, 2 years at Ridgemont Community College, top of her class in anatomy, the only student who could draw a blood gas without bruising the vein. Her professors had written letters of recommendation. One of them had called her gifted. That was before Kyle. Kyle Daggett had walked into the campus coffee shop 4 years ago with a grin like a lit match and shoulders wide enough to block out the sun. He was charming the way a riptide is charming. You didn't realize you were drowning until your feet couldn't touch the bottom anymore. First, he needed her home more. Then he needed her home always. Then the tuition checks started disappearing from the kitchen counter, and when she asked about them, his face would change. Not angry, worse, wounded, like she had betrayed him by wanting something that wasn't him. She dropped out halfway through her 3rd semester. He told her it was the right decision. He told her she wasn't smart enough anyway. He told her so many times that she started to believe it the way you start to believe the weather when it rains for long enough. You forget the sun was ever real. Now she carried plates of eggs and toast for tips that smelled like ketchup, and she came home to an apartment where hope had gone to die. Tonight, the air in apartment 4B felt different. It felt charged, heavy, like the ozone smell before a thunderstorm rolls in, but underneath it something sour and human and wrong. "You're late," the voice came from the darkness of the living room, slurred, loose, like a chain that had come unhooked from its post. Lenora froze her hand still on the doorknob. The hallway light spilled into the room and caught a pair of steel-toed work boots propped on the coffee table. Muddy, familiar. Kyle Daggett. He wasn't supposed to be back from the oil rig in North Dakota for another 2 weeks. She had counted those days the way a prisoner counts sunrises. 14 more days of quiet. 14 more mornings of waking up without checking the air for the smell of whiskey. But here he was, and the apartment was littered with crushed beer cans and a half-empty bottle of Jim Beam on the counter, which meant he had been drinking for hours, which meant the monster was already awake inside him. "We had a rush, Kyle," Lenora said. She kept her voice low and even, controlled. It was a skill she had learned the way soldiers learn to defuse bombs through repetition and the constant proximity of explosion. "Jerry made me close." "Jerry," Kyle said the name like he was spitting out a rotten seed. He stood up from the couch. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, once muscular from rig work, now softened by whiskey and resentment into something doughy and mean. He stepped into the light. His eyes were bloodshot, the pupils blown wide, and she saw it then, the thing that made her stomach drop through the floor. He was wearing the same clothes he'd left in 2 weeks ago, unwashed, wrinkled. The ID badge from the drilling company was gone from his jacket. He'd been fired. She knew it instantly, the way she knew when a patient's vitals were about to crash. Something in the set of his jaw. Something in the way his hands hung at his sides, not relaxed but waiting. He'd been fired, and he'd driven 14 hours back to the only person in the world who couldn't leave him, and he'd been sitting here in the dark building, a rage that needed somewhere to land. "You think I'm stupid, Lenora." He took a step toward her. "You think I don't know you're skimming off the top, holding out on me. I'm not." She reached for the apron tied around her waist. Her fingers were already trembling, but she kept her voice level. "I made $80. It's all here. You can have it. Just please. I'm tired." She threw the apron on the floor between them. It was a tactic she had learned 6 months ago. Give the beast what it wants. Distract, Retreat. Survive until morning. But tonight the beast wasn't hungry for money. Tonight it was hungry for something it could break. Kyle didn't look at the apron. He looked at her. His eyes tracked across her face the way a predator tracks movement in tall grass. "You think you're better than me," he whispered. "Walking around with your little friends, texting guys while I'm busting my back." "There are no guys, Kyle. There's no one. It's just work and home. That's all I have." "Liar." The first blow came out of nowhere. A backhand, heavy, uncoordinated. But it carried the weight of a 200-pound man behind it, and it caught Lenore on the left cheekbone, snapping her head sideways, sending her spinning into the flimsy drywall of the hallway. Stars detonated behind her eyes, white, then red. Before she could slide to the floor, he grabbed her by the hair, a fistful right at the root, and she felt strands ripped from her scalp like threads pulled from cheap fabric. "Liar!" he screamed again, and threw her toward the kitchen. Her left side collided with the corner of the laminate counter. The sound was the worst part. Not the pain, the sound. A dry, brittle crack like stepping on a branch in winter. Except the branch was inside her body. Lenore gasped, but no air came. It was as though someone had reached inside her chest and squeezed her lungs shut with a fist. A hot, bright, blinding pain radiated from her ribs outward in every direction, and she crumpled to the linoleum floor, curling around herself like a leaf in a fire. She couldn't scream. She couldn't breathe. She could only press her hands against her side and feel the wrongness there, the grinding shift of bone against bone where bone should never move. 3 ribs, left side. 6th, 7th, and 8th. She knew because she had studied this. Because 2 years ago in a classroom that smelled like coffee and dry erase markers, she had memorized the anatomy of the thoracic cage and passed every exam and believed that knowledge was a ladder that would carry her out of rooms exactly like this one. "Get up," Kyle growled from somewhere above her. He kicked a chair aside. It crashed against the wall. "Stop being dramatic." Adrenaline hit her bloodstream like ice water. She couldn't fight him. She had tried once 8 months ago, and he had dislocated her shoulder and told the emergency room she fell down the stairs. The nurse had looked at her with eyes that knew the truth but said nothing, and Lenora had walked out with a sling and a prescription for painkillers, and the quiet understanding that the system was not coming to save her. She had to hide. While Kyle stumbled toward the fridge to grab another beer, muttering about respect, about loyalty, about every imagined slight his poisoned brain could manufacture, Lenora dragged herself across the kitchen floor. Every movement was a white-hot wire pulled through her torso. She bit down on her lip until she tasted copper. She reached the bathroom door, pulled herself up on the handle, fell inside, slammed the door, twisted the lock. 1 second later, the door shuddered as Kyle's heavy shoulder slammed against it from the other side. "Open the door, Lenora." Thud. The wood splintered near the frame. A hairline crack appeared running from the lock to the hinge like a fault line. Thud. "I said open the goddamn door." Lenora pressed herself into the corner between the toilet and the bathtub. The tiles were cold against her back. She couldn't breathe. Every shallow inhale felt like swallowing broken glass. Tears ran down her face, cutting tracks through the mascara dripping off her jaw onto the polyester collar of her uniform. Phone. She fumbled in the pocket of her apron number. She'd thrown the apron on the floor, but her phone was in her back pocket. She always kept it there because Kyle checked the apron first. She pulled it out. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped it. The device clattered against the tiles. She snatched it up. The screen was shattered. A spiderweb of cracks from when she had hit the wall. The display flickered, half the pixels dead, but it was alive enough. Barely. She couldn't call 911. She had learned that lesson too. The last time she called the sirens took 22 minutes. Kyle heard them coming from 6 blocks away. He had plenty of time to grab her by the throat and whisper exactly what he would do if she ever called again. The officers arrived to find a calm man and a quiet woman who insisted everything was fine. She needed Sawyer. Her brother lived 3 blocks away. He was a veteran, infantry, 2 tours. He was the only person in the world Kyle Daggett was afraid of because Sawyer Bellamy didn't threaten. He promised, and he kept every single one. Lenora opened her messages. Her vision swam. The cracks on the screen distorted the numbers, turning 5s into 8s, turning 1s into 7s. She typed Sawyer's number from memory, her thumb slipping on the shattered glass. 5550198. She typed 5550199. 1 digit, 1 single solitary digit. The difference between a brother who would come running and a darkness she couldn't imagine. She didn't see the mistake. She could barely see it all. She only saw the terror of the door hinges groaning under another blow, the crack widening, Kyle's shadow filling the gap. She typed the message. He broke my ribs. I can't breathe. Please help. He's going to kill me. She hit send. The gray bubble turned blue. Delivered. Lenora pulled her knees to her chest, every nerve in her body screaming at the movement, and pressed her forehead against her kneecaps. Please, Sawyer, she whispered into the dark. Please hurry. Outside the bathroom, the pounding stopped. Silence. 1 second. 2. 5. Then Kyle's voice came through the wood. Low. Calm. The calm was always worse than the screaming. The screaming meant he was out of control. The calm meant he had a plan. I'm going to find the toolbox, Lenora. I'm going to take this door right off its hinges. And when I do, we're going to have a real conversation. She heard his boots retreat down the hallway, heard the closet door open, heard him rummaging through metal and plastic. 3 minutes passed, each one a lifetime. Then the phone buzzed in her hands. Lenora looked down, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her broken ribs. She expected Sawyer's name, his blunt, reassuring slang. On my way, don't move. I'll kill him. Instead, the message was from an unknown number. No contact name, no photo, just 10 digits she didn't recognize. The reply was short, perfectly punctuated, eerily precise. Who is this? Lenora's heart stopped. Wrong number. Sawyer wasn't coming. She was going to die here, in a bathroom that smelled of mildew, wearing a polyester uniform stained with ketchup and her own blood. She was going to die, and Jerry would replace her by Thursday, and Kyle would tell everyone she fell, and the world would keep turning as though Lenora Bellamy had never existed. Unless her thumbs moved, slick with blood from the cut on her lip, shaking so badly the letters jumped. Wrong number. I'm sorry. Please call police. My ex is breaking in. 422 Elm Street apartment. 4B. She sent it. Not because she believed a stranger would help, but because it was the last thing she could do, and Lenora Bellamy had spent her whole life doing the last thing she could do with whatever she had left. The doorknob rattled, the shriek of metal on metal. Kyle had found the screwdriver. The phone buzzed. I'm on my way. Lenora stared at the screen. It didn't say I called the cops. It didn't say hang tight. It didn't say, are you sure it was a declaration? 3 words that landed like a fist on a table. Another buzz. Do not unlock the door. Do not make a sound. Give me 6 minutes. 6 minutes. From where? Who was this person? No one could get here in 6 minutes. The police couldn't get here in 20. But the authority in those words, the cold, absolute certainty, it was like reading a commandment carved in stone. Lenora gripped the phone against her chest, curled into a ball, and did the only thing she could. She waited. 6 miles away, the rain avoided the building. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't poetry. The rain genuinely seemed to bend around the glass tower of Ashford Enterprises as though the sky itself had learned not to touch what belonged to Lucian Ashford. On the 92nd floor in a boardroom walled with glass that could withstand a rocket strike, Lucian sat at the head of a table made of mahogany, so old it had been a living tree when Napoleon was still a lieutenant. He was bored. He had been bored for approximately 47 years, give or take a decade. Boredom for a vampire of his age was not an inconvenience. It was a condition, a slow erosion of relevance, like a statue weathering in a courtyard that no one visits anymore. He was wearing a charcoal suit, bespoke Italian cut to disguise the fact that he was unnaturally still. He hadn't aged past 32 since the year 1724. His skin was the color of cold marble. His eyes were the gray of a winter sea before a storm. His presence didn't fill the room so much as it compressed it, pressing the oxygen out, making the air thinner, heavier, harder to breathe. Around the table sat the council of the city's supernatural order. 3 vampires, including Aldrich Fell, who had the unfortunate combination of ambition and a comb-over that looked ridiculous on an immortal. 2 lichen ambassadors who smelled of wet fur and poorly concealed hostility. And a human liaison from the mayor's office who was sweating through his shirt and hadn't stopped checking his phone since the meeting began. They were arguing about zoning laws, blood bank permits, territorial boundaries between the covens of the East and West districts, a proposed medical research facility that was actually a feeding station, which everyone in the room knew, but no one was allowed to say out loud. The location in the East Ward is unacceptable, Aldrich hissed. He had a voice like paper tearing. The hunters patrol that sector. The hunters are bought and paid for, Lucian said. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. His voice was the kind of quiet that made people lean forward, that made the room itself seem to hold its breath. It was the voice of a man who had learned 3 centuries ago that volume was a weapon for the weak. We discussed this in 1995, Aldrich. I don't like repeating myself. Aldrich's jaw tightened. Something flickered behind his eyes. Resentment. Old and deep and carefully hidden, but not carefully enough. Lucian saw it the way a hawk sees a mouse twitch in tall grass. With respect, my lord, Aldrich said, and the word lord dripped with something that wasn't respect at all. Some of us feel the council has become stagnant, perhaps new leadership. Choose your next words very carefully, Lucian said. He didn't move. He didn't blink. But the temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees and the human liaison stopped breathing entirely. Aldrich smiled, then practiced. I merely suggest we revisit our governance structure for the health of the coven. Noted, Lucian said. Denied. Next item. And then his phone vibrated. It was lying face up on the mahogany table, a device he carried out of necessity, not preference. Only 5 people in the world had this number. 3 of them were sitting in this room. One was the ancient king of the European coven, who only called on solstices. The last was his personal cleaner, who only texted when a body needed disposing. This was none of them. Unknown number. Normally, Lucian would have ignored it. Telemarketers didn't exist in his world. Wrong numbers happened, but they didn't matter. Nothing about the human world mattered to him anymore if it ever had. But as the screen lit up, something shifted. Vampires of his age didn't just see the world. They sensed the architecture of it, the pulse beneath the surface. And through the digital network, through the cellular towers and the satellites, and the invisible web of binary code, Lucian Ashford felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Fear. Not the anxiety of a missed deadline. Not the nervousness of a first date. This was the primal copper-scented animal terror of prey being cornered by a predator in a space too small to run. He read the message. He broke my ribs. I can't breathe. Please, help. He's going to kill me. The room continued its debate. Aldrich was saying something about territorial revenue. The Lycan ambassadors were growling about hunting rights. The human liaison was pretending to take notes. Lucian heard none of it. He stared at the screen. The words burned into his retinas the way sunlight used to back when sunlight could still hurt him. He typed one word. Who is this? The reply came fast, desperate, full of autocorrect errors from fingers slipping on cracked glass. Wrong number. I'm sorry. Please call police. My ex is breaking in. 4-2-2 Elm Street apartment, 4B. Lucian looked at the time on his watch. A Patek Philippe that cost more than the building the woman lived in. The police in that district averaged 19 minutes for a domestic disturbance call, if they came at all. If the dispatcher didn't mark it low priority, which they usually did because the calls always came from the same addresses, and the women always recanted, and the system had long ago decided that some people were not worth saving. If the woman had broken ribs, she had minutes, a punctured lung, internal bleeding, or the man would finish what he started before the sirens ever reached Elm Street. Lucian didn't care about humans. He told himself this every night. They were brief, fragile, flickering candles of consciousness that burned for an eye blink and then vanished, leaving nothing but smoke and memory. But something about this message refused to let go of him. Someone had cried out into the void, not to a god, not to the police, not to any of the institutions that the human world had built to protect its most vulnerable and then abandoned at every turn. She had cried out to a random number, a stranger, a ghost in the machine. And the ghost had heard. Lucian stood up. The room went silent. The meeting is adjourned, he said. Aldrich sputtered. We haven't settled the, Lucian turned his eyes on Aldrich fell. Just his eyes. Nothing else moved, but the gray irises darkened to charcoal, and for one fraction of a second, the tips of elongated canines caught the light. Get out. The room emptied in under 30 seconds. Papers were abandoned, chairs scraped. The human liaison knocked over his water glass and didn't stop to clean it up. Lucian typed 2 messages. To the unknown number, I'm on my way. Then do not unlock the door. Do not make a sound. Give me 6 minutes. He pressed the intercom on his desk. Whitmore, bring the car around. The Aston Martin. I'm driving. The intercom crackled. Sir, you have a gala in 20 minutes with the cancel it. A pause. May I ask the destination, Elm Street? And Whitmore alert the medical team at the estate. Prep the trauma bay. Rib fractures, possible pneumothorax, possible internal bleeding. And open the blood bank. She'll need transfusions. Sir, Lucian buttoned his jacket. He felt a hum in his blood that he hadn't felt in decades. Something ancient, something that predated language. 6 minutes, Whitmore. He walked to the private elevator. The doors slid shut, and for a moment he caught his own reflection in the polished steel. He looked the same as he had for 300 years. Pale, sharp, empty. But behind the gray eyes, something had woken up. The Aston Martin tore through the city like a black blade cutting silk. Lucian didn't drive like a man, he drove like a force of nature. Red lights were suggestions, speed limits were relics. The engine roared through the wet streets, and the world outside the windows dissolved into streaks of neon and rain. He crossed from the financial district into the Midtown corridor in 90 seconds. The architecture changed. Glass and steel gave way to brick and concrete. The lights got dimmer. The sidewalks got emptier. By the time he hit the east side, the buildings looked like they were collapsing in slow motion. Boarded windows, chain-link fences around empty lots. The kind of neighborhood where streetlights flickered not because of faulty wiring, but because even electricity didn't want to stay. 422 Elm Street. He arrived in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The building was a brick rectangle with peeling paint and bars on the ground floor windows. A broken fire escape clung to the side like a dying vine. The front stoop was cracked. A single streetlight threw a circle of yellow light on the wet pavement, and inside that circle, a stray cat watched Lucian park the Aston Martin directly on the sidewalk. He stepped out into the rain. The water hit his hair, his shoulders, his $1,000 shoes. He didn't feel the cold. He hadn't felt cold since the 18th century. He looked up. 4th floor. His hearing reached out, filtering the noise of the city like a hand sorting through gravel for diamonds. The television blaring in 2B, a couple arguing about money in 3A, a baby crying on the 5th floor. He focused on 4B. He heard the screech of metal on metal, a screwdriver being forced into a door hinge. Heavy male breathing labored with alcohol and exertion. And underneath it, barely there, the shallow, wet, bubbling gasps of a woman whose lung was collapsing. Lucian walked to the front door. Locked. He placed his hand on the handle and pulled. The deadbolt mechanism snapped like a twig, and the door swung open. He crossed the lobby in a blur. The elevator was out of order. He took the stairs, not running, moving, a velocity that the human eye would register as a shadow. A trick of the light, a gust of wind where no window was open. 1st floor, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. He stood before apartment 4B. The door was shaking. On the other side, someone was working a hinge pin out of its housing with a flathead screwdriver. Grunting, sweating. Last chance, Lenora. The voice was muffled but audible, thick with whiskey and self-righteous fury. I'm coming in whether you like it or not. Lucian adjusted his cuffs. He straightened his tie. He ran a hand through his wet hair, pushing it back from his forehead. Then he raised his right leg and kicked the apartment door directly below the lock. The door didn't open. It detonated. The frame splintered. The hinges ripped from the wall. The entire slab of particle board and cheap veneer launched inward and crashed into the hallway of the apartment with a sound like a thunderclap. Silence. Absolute. Total. The kind of silence that follows the end of the world. Lucian Ashford stepped into apartment 4B. The air was a museum of misery. Mold. Blood. Beer. Fear. The overturned chair in the kitchen. The shattered bottle on the counter. The dent in the drywall shaped like a woman's shoulder. And there, standing by the bathroom door, screwdriver in hand, eyes wide with the sluggish incomprehension of a drunk man whose reality had just been rewritten, was Kyle Daggett. He was big, bigger than Lucian expected, thick-necked, heavy, the kind of man who confused mass with strength and volume with authority. Kyle squinted at the figure in the doorway. His brain, soaked in alcohol, struggled to process the information. A man in a suit that cost more than a car, standing in his apartment, at 2 in the morning, in the rain. Who the hell are you? Kyle slurred. A cop, Lucian smiled. It was a terrible smile. It showed too many teeth, and the teeth were just slightly wrong. Just slightly too sharp. Just enough to trigger something ancient and limbic in Kyle Daggett's alcohol-sodden brain. Something that whispered, run. No, Lucian said. His voice was smooth, quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before an avalanche. I'm the wrong number. Kyle stared. The screwdriver trembled in his fist. Get out of my house, he said, puffing out his chest. The alcohol gave him courage. False, brittle, suicidal courage. This is my place. That's my girl. Lucian took a single step into the room. His Italian leather shoes made no sound on the stained carpet. He looked around the apartment with the detached curiosity of an archaeologist examining a ruin. His gaze slid over the empty beer cans, the fast food wrappers, the bare mattress visible through the bedroom door. Then his eyes found the bathroom door, and he listened. Behind it, a heartbeat, fluttering, irregular, too fast. The sound of a bird trapped in a box. "She isn't your girl," Lucian said softly. "She is a person, and you—" He turned his head and locked eyes with Kyle Daggett. The irises of Lucian's eyes darkened. The gray swirled and deepened into charcoal, then into something that wasn't a color at all but an absence, like looking into a well with no bottom. "You are an inconvenience," Kyle roared. It was a guttural animal sound born of rage and fear and the desperate need to reassert dominance over a situation that had spiraled beyond his comprehension. He lunged forward and swung the screwdriver in a clumsy downward arc aimed at the side of Lucian's neck. It was a blow that would have killed a normal man. Lucian didn't move his feet. He simply raised his left hand. The motion was a blur, faster than a blink, faster than a camera shutter, faster than the electrical impulse that carried pain from nerve to brain. He caught Kyle's wrist in midair. The stop was instantaneous. All the force, all the momentum, all the rage behind that downward swing met an immovable object and had nowhere to go. Snap. The radius bone broke first, then the ulna. Two clean fractures, loud as dry wood, echoing off the apartment walls. Kyle didn't scream immediately. His brain needed a moment to catch up. He looked at his arm, which was now bent at an angle that arms were never meant to achieve, and his face went white. Then the pain arrived. Kyle collapsed to his knees. The screwdriver clattered to the floor. A high, keening sound escaped his throat, animal and raw. Lucian didn't release the broken wrist. He applied a fraction more pressure, guiding Kyle's face down into the stained carpet. Not violently, precisely, the way a surgeon positions a patient on a table. "Quiet," Lucian said. "She's listening." Kyle whimpered. Tears cut tracks through the grime on his face. The sharp smell of urine filled the room as his bladder released. He was broken, instantly, completely, shattered by a force his mind couldn't categorize. Lucian leaned down. He brought his mouth close to Kyle Daggett's ear. Close enough that Kyle could feel the cold radiating off his skin. Close enough that the absence of breath was noticeable. The man above him wasn't breathing at all. "If I were a better man," Lucian whispered, "I would call the police. I would let them arrest you. They would release you on bail in 48 hours, and you would come back here to finish what you started. Because that is how the system works. The system is a circle, and women like her are trapped at its center." He tightened his grip. Kyle gasped, his vision going white. "But I am not a good man, Kyle. I am a very old, very patient monster. And if you ever come near Lenora Bellamy again, if you speak her name in a whisper, if you think about her in a dream, I will find you. And next time I will not stop at the wrist. I will disassemble you, bone by bone, over the course of several hours. Do you understand?" "Yes," Kyle sobbed into the carpet. "Yes, God, yes." Lucian released him. "Get out. Before I change my mind." Kyle scrambled to his feet, cradling his destroyed arm against his chest, and ran. He didn't look back. He stumbled down the hallway, bounced off the wall, and disappeared down the stairwell, leaving nothing behind but the smell of fear and a trail of whimpers. Lucian stood alone in the ruined apartment. He pulled a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and wiped his hand. There was no blood on it. He dropped the handkerchief on the floor. Then he turned to the bathroom door. The violence had taken 40 seconds. It had required less effort than signing his name. Now came the hard part. He approached slowly. He could smell the blood. Fresh, metallic. It was seeping from under the door, a thin line of red against the white tile. The scent hit his senses like a bell struck in an empty cathedral. Rich, warm, alive. He pushed the hunger down. He had centuries of practice. "Lenora," he said. He pitched his voice to be gentle. Stripped away the command, the authority, the predatory edge that came as naturally to him as breathing once had. Left only a calm, low baritone. The voice of a man standing on the other side of a door asking to be let in. No answer, just the wet, rattling sound of breathing that was getting worse. "My name is Lucian," he said. "I received your message. The man is gone. He won't hurt you again." Inside the bathroom, Lenora Bellamy was curled on the floor with her forehead pressed against the cold porcelain base of the toilet. The pain in her left side had become something alive. It pulsed with her heartbeat. It tightened with every breath. She could feel the wrongness spreading, a heaviness in her chest, a numbness creeping down her left arm. She had heard the crash. She had heard Kyle scream. The scream was different from the ones he usually made. This wasn't rage. This was terror. And whatever had made Kyle Daggett, 6'2", 210 pounds of cruelty, scream like a frightened child was now standing on the other side of a hollow core bathroom door. Go away, Lenora wheezed. The effort of speaking made black spots bloom in her vision. I can't do that, Lucian replied. His voice was patient, measured. You are injured. You have fractured ribs on the left side, likely the 6th through 8th. One or more fragments have punctured your pleural cavity. Your lung is collapsing. If you do not open this door, you will lose consciousness in approximately 2 minutes, and after that, your heart will stop. It wasn't a threat. It was a clinical assessment, delivered with the precision of a textbook and the calm of a man who had seen death so many times it no longer impressed him. Lenora stared at the door. Her vision was tunneling. The edges of the world were going gray, then dark. The pain was fading, which she knew from her nursing classes was not a good sign. Pain fading without treatment meant the nervous system was shutting down. It meant the body was giving up. She was going to die on this floor unless she trusted a voice on the other side of a door. Trust, the most dangerous word in her vocabulary. But she was out of options. She was out of time. She was out of everything except the faint, stubborn ember of a survival instinct that had kept her alive through 4 years of Kyle Daggett and would not let her die on a bathroom floor at 26. She reached up. Her arm felt like it was made of lead. Her fingers found the deadbolt. Click. She didn't have the strength to open the door. Her hand fell back to the floor limp. The door creaked open. Light spilled in from the hallway, and in the center of that light stood a silhouette that didn't belong in this building, in this neighborhood, in this dimension. Lenora squinted, trying to focus. He was tall, lean, dressed in a suit that looked like it had been sewn by angels. His face was sharp, all clean lines and high cheekbones, and his eyes, even through the haze of her fading consciousness, were the color of a winter sky just before snow. He knelt down. The movement was fluid, graceful, inhuman. He didn't care about the wet floor, the blood, the squalor. He knelt beside her on the cracked tiles and looked at her with an expression she couldn't name. Not pity, not disgust, something older, something that lived beneath language. Lenora, he said. His eyes moved across her injuries with a precision that felt like x-rays. The swollen cheek, the torn uniform, the way she held her left side, the bubbling rattle in her chest that was getting louder. I'm going to pick you up, he said. It's going to hurt. Who are you? She whispered. A trickle of blood escaped the corner of her mouth and ran down her chin. I'm the one who's on his way, he said. He slipped one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back. He moved with a fluidity that defied physics. As he lifted her, she cried out a sharp, ragged sound that echoed off the bathroom walls and buried itself in his chest like a blade. I know, he murmured. I've got you. She felt solid against him, warm, fragile, impossibly light. He stood up as though she weighed nothing. Lenora rested her head against his shoulder. He smelled of rain and expensive wool and something she couldn't identify. Something old, like the pages of a book that had been closed for a century. Like iron, like forever. The world tilted, grayed, went dark. Lenora Bellamy went limp in the arms of the vampire king. The drive was a fever dream of motion and shadow. Lenora surfaced and sank, surfaced and sank. Each bump in the road was a spike of pain that dragged her back to the world, and each time the road smoothed out, she slid back into the dark. Fragments registered, streetlights streaking past like comets, the soft blue glow of a dashboard that looked like a cockpit. Rain hammering against the windshield. Heat. The seat beneath her was warm, radiating through her frozen skin. Stay with me, Lenore. A voice from the driver's seat, steady, commanding. An anchor thrown into a storm. She turned her head. She saw his profile. Sharp nose, strong jaw, eyes fixed on the road with an intensity that bent the air around them. His hands on the steering wheel were white-knuckled. Am I dying? She mumbled. Not tonight, Lucian said. He downshifted, and the engine howled as he took a corner at a speed that should have flipped the car. I don't allow it. He didn't take her to a hospital. She was beyond hospitals. Hospitals meant paperwork and police and Kyle's name on a report that would go nowhere. Hospitals meant a system that had already failed her. He drove north, out of the city, up the winding roads that climbed into the hills where the trees grew thick and the houses grew farther apart, and the world became something quieter and older. The iron gates of the Ashford estate swung open as the car approached, recognizing the transponder. They swept up a gravel driveway lined with oak trees that had been alive since before the Revolution. The house at the end was not a house. It was a Gothic manor of dark stone and tall windows turrets and an ivy looming against the storm-black sky like something lifted from a dream. Lucian braked in front of the main entrance. Before the car had fully stopped, the oak doors opened. Three figures emerged. Whitmore, first tall and rigid in his butler's uniform, holding an umbrella he didn't bother to open when he saw his master's face. Behind him, two members of the medical staff wheeling a gurney. Lucian was around the car in a heartbeat. He opened the passenger door, unbuckled Lenora with surgical care, and lifted her out. Rib fractures left side 6th through 8th, he said as he carried her up the stone stairs, shielding her face from the rain with his own body. Pneumothorax. She was conscious 4 minutes ago. Breathing has deteriorated. Get Dr. Calloway. Dr. Calloway is prepping, my lord, Whitmore said, keeping pace. Trauma bay is sterile. Blood bank. Open. She's O negative. Whitmore glanced at him. How do you know her blood type, sir? I can smell it, Lucian said, and the words came out sharper than he intended, edged with something that wasn't impatience, but its more dangerous cousin. Concern. They moved through the grand foyer marble floors, a chandelier, like a frozen explosion of crystal, and turned down a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and ozone. The medical wing of the Ashford estate was better equipped than most city trauma centers. It had been built to treat beings that couldn't check into regular hospitals. Vampires wounded in territory wars, lichens with silver poisoning, and on rare occasions, humans who had stumbled into the supernatural world and needed to be put back together before they were sent home with memories carefully edited. Lucian laid Lenora on the gurney. A team of nurses, human loyal to the household, immediately began cutting away her uniform and attaching monitoring leads to her chest. BP dropping, 80/50. Tracheal deviation to the right. Tension pneumothorax. We need to decompress now. Dr. Calloway appeared. She was a small woman with sharp features and eyes that were a shade too pale. She had been turned in 1891 and had spent the subsequent century becoming one of the finest surgeons in the supernatural world. She didn't look up when Lucian entered. She didn't need to. She could feel him in the room the way everyone could. Needle decompression, then chest tube, she said calmly. Get me a 14-gauge catheter and someone type and cross her blood. I want 4 units standing by. She's O negative, Lucian said from the doorway. Dr. Calloway paused. One eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. We'll confirm. She made the incision. Precise. Clean. The hiss of trapped air escaping the chest cavity was audible across the room. Then the tube went in, and the rush of air and blood drained from Lenora's chest, and her collapsed lung began to reinflate. On the monitor, the number stabilized. Heart rate erratic and thready a moment ago settled into a rhythm. Oxygen saturation climbed. 68, 72, 81, 89. Lenora's gasping, desperate breathing smoothed into something steady. Lucian hadn't moved from the doorway. His arms were crossed. His suit was ruined, soaked with rain, and streaked with Lenora Bellamy's blood. He didn't notice. He was watching the monitor the way a man watches a jury return with a verdict. My lord, Whitmore appeared at his elbow holding a fresh towel. You should step out. You need to change. And there is the matter of the council meeting you interrupted. Aldrich has already. I don't care about Aldrich, was Sir Bun. I brought her here, Whitmore. I am responsible. You didn't break her ribs? No, Lucian said. His jaw tightened. But I didn't stop it sooner. Whitmore studied his master's face. In 200 years of service, he had seen Lucian Ashford angry, amused, bored, and cold. He had never seen this, whatever this was. This focused, quiet, dangerous attention directed at a human woman on a surgical table. She will live, Whitmore said gently. She will stay, Lucian replied. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a hope. It was a decree spoken in the tone of a king who had made kings and unmade them. Whitmore bowed his head. I will prepare the blue room. On the table, Dr. Calloway finished setting the fractured ribs and stepped back, peeling off her bloody gloves. She's stable, the doctor said. The internal bleeding was a minor splenic contusion already cauterized. Ribs are set. She'll need rest fluids and monitoring. No movement for 72 hours. She stays here, Lucian said. Dr. Calloway looked at him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face made her swallow whatever objections she had been preparing. Understood, my lord. Lucian turned and walked out of the medical bay. Behind him, Lenora Bellamy slept, dreamless, safe for the first time in 4 years, inside a fortress she didn't know existed, protected by a creature she didn't know was real. Dr. Calloway waited until Lucian's footsteps had faded down the corridor. Then she turned to the blood sample. She had drawn it during the procedure's standard protocol. Type and cross-check for infection, screen for anomalies. The results would take minutes on the estate's equipment, which was decades ahead of anything in a human hospital. She fed the sample into the analyzer, watched the screen, waited. The results appeared. Dr. Calloway stared at them. Her face, which had remained composed through the entire surgery, went very still. She ran the test again. Same result. The blood contained a genetic marker that she had seen only once before in a 200-year-old research file buried in the estate's archive, a marker that the council had declared extinct, a marker that had started a war the last time it surfaced. Lenora Bellamy was a mender. Her blood carried the only known substance capable of healing wounds inflicted by silver, the one weapon that could kill a vampire permanently. Mender blood could repair what nothing else could. It could make a wounded vampire king invincible. Or in the wrong hands, it could be weaponized, reverse-engineered, turned into a poison that would make silver look like a paper cut. The last known mender had been a woman named Elise. She had lived in this very estate 2 centuries ago. She had been Lucian Ashford's greatest love. The council had ordered her execution, Doctor. Calloway stood in the quiet of the medical bay. The hum of the monitors steadied the patient sleeping peacefully and felt the weight of what she had just discovered pressing down on her like a hand on her chest. She should tell Lucian. She should tell him immediately. But Dr. Calloway had served on the council's medical board for 87 years. She reported to Aldrich Fell. Aldrich, who had been angling for the throne since before the current century began. Aldrich, who collected secrets the way other men collected art. She picked up her phone. She typed a message to Aldrich Fell. "We need to meet. The human woman. Her blood. You need to see this." She hit send. Then she looked at Lenora Bellamy, small and pale against the white sheet's chest, rising and falling, with the steady rhythm of a woman who had no idea what she was worth, or what her presence in this house was about to set in motion. "God help you, child, doctor," Calloway whispered. The monitor beeped. Steady, alive, ticking like a bomb. Consciousness returned to Lenora Bellamy the way dawn arrives in winter. Slowly, reluctantly, as if the light itself wasn't sure she was ready for it. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the silence of apartment 4B, which was never truly silent. There was always the bass thump of a neighbor's stereo, the rattle of pipes in the walls, the distant sirens that formed the lullaby of Elm Street. This silence was different. It was thick, heavy, the kind of silence that lives inside cathedrals and bank vaults and places where important things are kept. The second thing was the smell. Gone was the sour cocktail of stale beer and bleach and mildew that had defined her world for 3 years. Instead, the air smelled of beeswax, dried lavender, and something clean and electric, like ozone after a lightning strike. She opened her eyes. Above her, a ceiling stretched impossibly high, painted with fading frescoes of cherubs and storm clouds bordered by crown molding so intricate it looked like frozen lace. The light in the room was soft, filtered through heavy curtains that covered windows tall enough to walk through. Lenora turned her head. A sharp twinge in her left side reminded her that the nightmare had been real. The pain was distant now, muffled by medication, but it was there, a dull, pulsing presence like a second heartbeat. She was lying in a bed that felt like a cloud. Silk sheets, cool against her skin, a duvet so soft it barely registered as weight. She was wearing a nightgown she didn't recognize, something vintage, buttoned to the neck. Beneath it, she could feel thick bandages wrapped tight around her ribs. The room was the size of the entire diner she worked at, blue velvet wallpaper. A fireplace of black marble, unlit but looming. Furniture that belonged in a museum, claw-footed chairs, a vanity with a gilded mirror, a wardrobe of dark polished wood that looked like it had been standing there since before the Civil War. "Am I dead?" she whispered. "No, Miss Bellamy, you are quite alive." Lenora flinched and tried to sit up. Her body punished her immediately, a white flash of pain that stole her breath and dropped her back against the pillows. Her heart slammed against her bandaged ribs. A man was standing in the corner of the room. He had been so still, so perfectly merged with the shadows that she hadn't seen him at all. He stepped forward. He wasn't the man from last night, not the one with the winter eyes and the impossible suit. This man was older, with thinning silver hair and a posture so rigid it looked carved. He wore a dark suit, immaculate, and his face held the expression of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of revealing nothing. "I am Whitmore," he said, inclining his head. "I am the house manager. Mr. Ashford asked me to attend to you when you woke." "Ashford?" Lenora repeated the name. It felt heavy, foreign. "Mr. Lucian Ashford. He brought you here last night. You have been asleep for 14 hours. 14 hours. Lenore's hand flew to her chest. She pressed her palm against the nightgown, feeling the bandages beneath. Real. All of it was real. Kyle, the bathroom floor, the crash, the voice, the cold arms lifting her from the tiles. Where is here? She asked, her eyes darting around the room, scanning for exits. You are at the Ashford estate in the Palisades. The Palisades, where the billionaires lived, the people who occasionally wandered into Jerry's diner at 3 a.m. After a gala complained about the coffee being too bitter, ordered egg white omelets that weren't on the menu, and left without tipping. I can't be here, Lenora said. The panic arrived like a wave cutting through the medication flooding her chest. She pushed herself up on her elbows, ignoring the fire in her ribs. I don't have insurance. I can't pay for any of this. The medical treatment, the room is this a private hospital because I can't. Miss Bellamy, Whitmore's voice was firm but not unkind. He crossed to the bedside table and poured water from a crystal carafe into a glass. This is a private residence. There is no bill. Our medical staff is retained by the household. Your injuries have been treated, the internal bleeding has been cauterized, and your ribs are set. You are safe. Safe. The word hit her like a brick wrapped in velvet. Safe was what Kyle had been when they first met. Safe was the word she had used to describe him to her mother on the phone back when her mother was still alive. He's safe, Mom. He takes care of me. He knows where I live, Lenora whispered, staring down at the silk duvet. Kyle, he'll be waiting. And if I don't show up for my shift tomorrow, Jerry will fire me. If I lose my job, I can't make rent. If I can't make rent, she was spiraling. The logic of poverty was a trap with no door. One missed step, and you fell through the floor into a pit that had no bottom. Miss Bellamy, Whitmore interrupted, his voice cutting through the spiral like a blade through rope. You do not have a shift. Your employer has been contacted and informed you were involved in a car accident. You will be recovering for the foreseeable future. Lenora blinked. As for your apartment, Whitmore continued, Mr. Ashford has taken the liberty of having your personal belongings collected. They are being laundered and stored. He went to my apartment. A team did, yes. Your lease has been terminated. Terminated. Lenora's voice cracked. You can't just, that's my home. I have nowhere else to. You have here. The voice came from the doorway. Lucian Ashford stood in the frame of the double doors, leaning against the wood with a stillness that no living person could replicate. He had changed out of the ruined suit. He wore a black cashmere sweater, dark trousers, no shoes. His feet were silent on the Persian rug as he entered. In daylight, or what passed for daylight, through the heavy curtains, he was harder to look at. Not because he was ugly, the opposite. He was beautiful in a way that was deeply fundamentally wrong. Too symmetrical, too still, too sharp. Like a sculpture that had decided to walk around and see how people reacted. Whitmore, Lucian said, and leave us. Whitmore bowed and was gone. He didn't walk out so much as recede like a tide pulling back from shore until the door clicked shut and Lenora was alone with the man who had broken Kyle Daggett's arm like a breadstick. She looked at him, really looked at him, without the haze of blood loss and adrenaline and the certainty of death. He was pale. His cheekbones could have cut glass. His eyes were gray, but not a warm gray, the gray of January, of gunmetal, of things that had frozen a long time ago. How are the ribs? He asked. He walked to the window and pulled back the curtain slightly. Gray light hit his face, and for a moment Lenora thought she saw his skin shimmer, not like glitter, like marble when the light catches it just right. They hurt. Good. Pain means the nerves are intact. It means you're healing. He let the curtain fall. It means you're alive. Why am I here, Mr. Ashford? Lucian. Why am I here, Lucian? He turned from the window. His hands were clasped behind his back, a posture that looked military, or maybe older than military. A king's posture. Because you texted me. I texted the wrong number. Yes, and the wrong number came. But why? She was pushing. She knew it. Every instinct that Kyle had beaten into her said, don't push, don't question, don't make them angry. But something about this man, this impossible, terrifying, beautiful man, told her that he wouldn't hit her for asking. He might lie, but he wouldn't hit. Because, Lucian said, and something flickered behind his eyes, I was bored. It was a lie. She could feel it the way you feel a cracked foundation under a house that looks fine from the outside. But she didn't push further. Not yet. How long do I have to stay? Until you're healed. And then Lucian looked at her. His gaze was heavy, assessing, the gaze of someone who was used to calculating outcomes several moves ahead. And then we'll see. He turned to leave. Lucian. She stopped him. He paused his hand on the brass doorknob. Thank you. He didn't turn around. He stood there for a long moment, his shoulders tensing beneath the cashmere. Don't thank me yet, Lenora. You haven't seen the bill. He walked out. Lenora sat in the silence of the blue room alone with silk sheets and frescoed ceilings and the unsettling feeling that she had not been rescued so much as relocated. From one cage to another. This one just had better wallpaper. 3 days passed. Lenora's world shrank to the blue room, the adjoining bathroom, and the corridor that connected them. Whitmore brought her meals on silver trays, roasted chicken, truffle-scented mashed potatoes, soups that tasted like someone had spent hours coaxing flavor from bones. She ate like a woman who had been starving for years, which in a way she had. She saw no one else. The house was enormous and silent. Sometimes she heard footsteps in the corridor, quick and purposeful, but no one entered. At night, music drifted up from somewhere below. A cello played with a sorrow so deep it made her chest ache in ways that had nothing to do with broken ribs. She knew it was him. On the third morning, Lenora got out of bed. Her ribs screamed at her. She ignored them. She had spent 26 years ignoring pain. This was just a different flavor. She explored, not far, not fast. She shuffled down the corridor in the silk nightgown and a pair of slippers that had been left by her bed, moving from doorway to doorway, mapping the space the way a patient maps a hospital ward. Most doors were locked. Some opened on to empty rooms filled with sheet-draped furniture and the ghosts of old perfume. But one door at the end of the east corridor opened onto a library. It was 2 stories tall, floor-to-ceiling shelves of dark wood packed with books, so old their spines had faded to the color of dust. A rolling ladder, a desk stacked with papers, and in one corner behind a glass case, a collection of medical texts. Lenora stopped. She walked to the case. It was unlocked. She pulled a book from the shelf, Hematological Anomalies in Non-Human Species. The publication date on the inside cover was 1903. The author's name was Dr. M. Calloway. She opened another. Surgical Protocols for Silver Toxicity. Another. Blood Serum Analysis Comparative Studies Across Species. These weren't human medical texts. They were something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. But Lenora had 2 years of nursing school behind her, and the language of medicine was a language she had never forgotten. She sat down at the desk and began to read. It took her 2 hours to understand the medications she had been given. The painkillers were standard hydromorphone, possibly compounded, but the anti-inflammatory in her IV drip wasn't any formulation she recognized. It metabolized too fast. The healing rate of her ribs was impossible by human standards. She should have been bedridden for 6 weeks. She was walking after 3 days. Something in her treatment was not standard medicine. She found Whitmore in the kitchen, polishing silver with a focus that bordered on ritualistic. The medication in my IV, she said, standing in the doorway. It's not human, is it? Whitmore's hand stopped mid-polish. He looked up at her. Something shifted in his expression, not alarm, but recognition. The look of a man who had placed a bet and was watching it pay off. No, Miss Bellamy, it is not. And the woman who operated on me, Dr. Calloway, she's not human either. Whitmore set down the silver cloth. What makes you say that? Her textbook in the library, published 1903, with her photograph on the back. She looks exactly the same now as she did 120 years ago. A silence stretched between them. Then Whitmore did something Lenora hadn't seen him do before. He smiled. It was a small, restrained, thoroughly British, but it was real. You are an observant woman, Miss Bellamy. I was a nursing student. Yes, Whitmore said, and the word carried a weight she didn't fully understand. I'm beginning to see that. That afternoon, everything changed. Lenora was in the library reading a chapter on coagulation rates in what the text delicately referred to as nocturnals when she heard the scream. It came from the ground floor. Not a scream of rage or fear, a scream of pain. Raw and involuntary, the sound a body makes when it encounters something it cannot endure. She was on her feet before she made the conscious decision to move. She followed the sound down the main staircase, holding her ribs with one hand, gripping the banister with the other. Through the foyer, down a side corridor, through a door that should have been locked but wasn't. She found them in a room that looked like a field hospital. A man, young, pale, dressed in black tactical clothing, was lying on a table. His left arm was burned from wrist to shoulder, the skin blistered and blackened in a pattern that Lenore had never seen before. It wasn't a chemical burn. It wasn't thermal. The wound seemed to glow faintly, a dull silver light pulsing from deep within the tissue. 2 guards stood over him, looking helpless. They were pale too, the same unnatural stillness, the same 2 sharp features. "Where's Dr. Calloway?" one of them demanded. "She left an hour ago," the other said. "Council business. She's unreachable." The wounded man screamed again. His back arched off the table. The silver light in his arm was spreading. Lenore didn't think. She stepped into the room. "Move," she said. The two guards turned. They stared at her, the human, the patient, the fragile thing in a nightgown and slippers, with expressions of complete bewilderment. "I said move." Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. It was the voice she had used in the nursing simulation lab, the one her professor had called her clinical voice, calm, authoritative, stripped of everything except competence. She reached the table. She looked at the wound. Silver, the books had described this, silver toxicity in vampires because that's what these people were. She understood that now with a clarity that felt less like shock and more like a puzzle piece clicking into place, presented as a progressive necrotic burn that would spread until it reached the heart. "How long ago was he exposed?" she asked. 20 minutes. He was on patrol. There was a trap, a silver wire. "I need clean water gauze and a pair of tweezers. Now." One of the guards disappeared. The other watched her with wide eyes as Lenora leaned over the wounded man. She could see it embedded in the deepest part of the burn, a fragment of silver wire no bigger than a splinter, still lodged in the tissue. It was the source. As long as it remained, the toxicity would spread. The guard returned with supplies. Lenora washed her hands. She picked up the tweezers. "Hold him down," she said. She went in. The vampire thrashed. The guards pinned his shoulders. Lenora worked with a focus that blocked out everything, the screaming, the silver glow. The absurdity of standing in a gothic mansion, performing emergency surgery on a vampire while wearing bedroom slippers. She found the fragment, gripped it, pulled. The piece of silver came free with a hiss. The moment it left the tissue, the glow began to recede. The spreading stopped. The vampire's screaming downgraded to ragged panting. Lenora dropped the silver fragment into a glass of water, not touching it with her bare hands because the books had been very clear about cross-contamination, and began packing the wound with clean gauze. "He needs blood," she said. "Not human blood, his own kind. The book said match-type vampire blood accelerates healing in silver cases." The guards exchanged a look. One of them left the room at a speed that confirmed he wasn't human. Lenora pressed the gauze firmly against the wound. The vampire on the table opened his eyes. He looked at her, this small human woman, with bruises on her face and bandages around her ribs, and his expression was something she had never seen directed at her before. "Respect." "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't move that arm for 12 hours, she said, "and tell your people to check for secondary fragments. Silver splinters can migrate." She straightened up. Her ribs were on fire, her hands were shaking. But she was standing, in the doorway half hidden by shadow. Lucian Ashford watched. He had arrived silently drawn by the commotion. He had seen everything. The human woman barely healed herself, walking into a room full of vampires and taking command. No hesitation, no fear, just competence and an instinct to help that went deeper than self-preservation. He didn't speak. He didn't announce himself. He watched her walk back toward the staircase, one hand pressed against her ribs, the other steady as stone. And something behind his gray eyes shifted. A door opening in a room that had been locked for 200 years. That evening, Lenora found a dress on her bed, deep red velvet, long-sleeved, elegant in a way that whispered old money and older taste. Beside it, a note in handwriting so precise it could have been typeset. "Dinner, 8 p.m., the East Dining Hall." It was a summons, not an invitation. Lenora dressed with difficulty, wincing as she raised her arms. The dress fit perfectly, which meant someone had measured her while she slept, a thought she filed away under, deeply unsettling. She looked at herself in the gilded mirror. The bruise on her cheekbone had faded to a sickly yellow. Her lip was healing. The woman staring back looked like a stranger, someone expensive, someone who didn't carry the smell of diner grease in her hair. Whitmore was waiting outside her door. He led her through corridors lined with portraits, men and women who all shared the same pale skin, the same sharp features, the same ageless eyes. She passed suits of armor, tapestries depicting hunts she didn't want to examine too closely, and windows that looked out onto a garden drowning in rain. The dining hall was cavernous, lit only by candles, hundreds of them lining the walls, clustering on the mantelpiece, throwing trembling shadows across the ceiling, lost in darkness. A long table ran down the center, set for two. Lucian stood at the head. He rose when she entered. It was an old-world gesture, automatic and courtly, and it made something catch in Lenora's throat. "You look less broken," he said. "I feel less broken." He gestured to the chair at his right. She sat. The table before her held a perfectly seared steak, asparagus, roasted potatoes. In front of Lucian's place, there was only a crystal goblet filled with a liquid so dark it was almost black. "You're not eating?" Lenora asked. "I ate it earlier." "Is that wine, a vintage blend?" He swirled the glass. The liquid clung to the crystal like syrup. "Iron-rich." Lenora picked up her fork, cut into the steak. She was hungry, but the atmosphere was pressing against her skin like a change in barometric pressure. She needed to break it. "I read your library," she said. Lucian's hand paused on the goblet. "Which section?" "The medical section. Dr. Calloway's research. The text on silver toxicity. The chapter on nocturnals and blood type compatibility." She met his eyes. "I know what you are, Lucian, or at least I have a very educated guess. And what am I? Not human. That's a broad category. Imo, your skin is cold. You don't breathe unless you're speaking. You broke a grown man's arm without effort. Your doctor published a textbook in 1903 and hasn't aged a day. Your guards drink blood, not coffee. And that wine in your glass isn't wine." Lucian set the goblet down. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You are dangerously observant, Lenora Bellamy." "I was a nursing student. We're trained to notice what people try to hide." A silence fell. The candles flickered. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 8, the sound rolling through the walls like a heartbeat. "Give me your hand," Lucian said. Lenora hesitated. Then she reached across the white tablecloth and offered her hand. He took it. His hand was large, enveloping hers completely, and it was cold. Not cool, cold, like gripping a stone that had been sitting in a winter river. He placed her palm flat against his chest. She felt the silk of his shirt, the hard muscle beneath. She waited for the heartbeat. Thump, then silence. 5 seconds. 10. Thump. 1 beat per minute, maybe less. Not enough to sustain anything living. She didn't pull her hand away. "Vampire," she said quietly. The word sounded absurd. It sounded like a word from a paperback novel left on a bus seat. But here in this candlelit hall, with her hand on his silent chest, it was the only word that fit. Lucian released her hand and leaned back. "We prefer kindred. But the myths are mostly accurate, except the garlic. That's just an Italian superstition." He waited. Lenora could see it, the tension coiled in his frame, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. He was waiting for her to scream, to run, to do what any rational person would do when they discovered they were having dinner with a predator. Lenora picked up her fork. She thought about Kyle. Kyle who was human. Kyle who had warm blood and a beating heart and breath that smelled of beer. Kyle who had broken her ribs and laughed while she crawled. Then she thought about the man across the table. The dead thing. The monster. Who had driven through the rain to save a stranger. Who had carried her like she was made of glass. Who was sitting here now watching her with an expression that looked terrifyingly like the fear of rejection. "Kyle is a human," Lenora said, "and he tried to kill me. You're a monster, and you saved me." She stabbed a piece of potato. "I'll take my chances with the monster." She put the potato in her mouth. Lucian Ashford stared at her, and for the first time in 300 years, the king of the city had absolutely nothing to say. But the peace didn't last. It never does. 3 miles east, in a bar that smelled of sawdust and desperation, Kyle Daggett sat in a booth with his arm in a cast and murder in his bloodshot eyes. He had spent 3 days looking for Lenore. Her apartment was empty, cleaned out, her phone disconnected. Her brother Sawyer had answered the door with a look that promised violence, and Kyle, despite the whiskey courage, had enough survival instinct left to back away. But he hadn't stopped. He had talked to people, pulled in favors from the kind of men who operated in the gray spaces between the law and the gutter. He had described the man who broke his arm, the pale skin, the impossible speed, the eyes that weren't human to anyone who would listen. Most people laughed at him, one didn't. The man sitting across from Kyle in the booth didn't have a name that Kyle knew. He went by Rook. He was lean, weathered, with scars on his hands and eyes that had seen things that would break lesser men. He ran an organization that didn't appear on any government registry. They called themselves The Order. They had been hunting vampires for 400 years. "Lucian Ashford," Rook said, studying a photograph on his phone. The photo was grainy, taken from a surveillance camera outside the Elm Street apartment building. It showed a figure carrying a woman through the rain. "You're sure this is the man?" "That's him," Kyle said. His broken arm throbbed. "That's the freak who jumped me." "He didn't jump you." Rook's voice was flat, patient, the voice of a man who dealt in facts. "You were beating a woman and a 300-year-old vampire king intervened. I need to understand why." "She's mine. She texted him by accident and he showed up like some kind of—" "The woman," Rook interrupted. What's her name? Lenora. Lenora Bellamy. Rook leaned back. His fingers drummed the table. Ashford doesn't intervene for humans. Not once in 3 centuries. He doesn't protect. He doesn't rescue. He certainly doesn't bring them into the estate. He looked at Kyle with eyes that saw a tool, not a person, which means either she's something special or he's losing his mind. Either way, I want to know which. He slid a phone across the table. You're going to help me find out. Kyle took the phone. And then I'll give you what you want, her address. Kyle smiled. It was an ugly thing twisted by rage and cheap whiskey. Outside the bar, the rain continued to fall. Vivienne and Duval arrived at the Ashford estate on the 5th evening, unannounced, uninvited, and immaculately dressed. She stepped out of a black sedan, her heels clicking on the wet gravel, her dark hair swept back from a face that had been beautiful for 4 centuries. She moved through the front doors as though she owned them, and once, a long time ago, she nearly had. Vivienne and Lucian had been lovers in the 1800s, a century of passion, politics, and power. She had wanted the throne beside him. He had wanted solitude. When it ended the way things end between immortals, slowly then all at once, with wounds that took decades to close. She was here now because Aldrich Fell had called her. She was here because when Aldrich whispered the word mender, the blood in her ancient veins had run cold. Whitmore intercepted her in the foyer. Lady Duval, we were not expecting Whitmore. She smiled, showing teeth that were too perfect. Don't pretend you're surprised. Where is he, boss? Mr. Ashford is indisposed. And the girl, a pause. What girl, my lady? Vivian's smile sharpened. The one whose blood smells like a miracle. She found Lenora in the library. Lenora looked up from a medical text to find a woman standing in the doorway who looked like she'd been carved from moonlight and malice. Tall, pale, dressed in black silk. Her eyes were dark, ancient, and amused in a way that made Lenora's skin prickle. So Bowen, Vivian said, walking into the room with the casual authority of someone who had walked through many rooms in many centuries. You're the stray. Lenora closed the book. And you are Vivienne Duval. I'm an old friend of Lucian's. The word friend carried enough subtext to fill a novel. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. A human. In the estate. Lucian hasn't allowed that since... She trailed off. Deliberately. Since what? Lenora asked. Vivian tilted her head. Since Elise. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. He kept her here too. Vivian continued, settling into a chair as though she planned to stay. In this very wing, 200 years ago, she was special, just like you. He adored her, protected her, kept her behind these walls like a bird in a cage. What happened to her? Vivian's eyes met Lenora's. There was no malice in them now, just something cold and factual. The council killed her. They were afraid of what she could do, of what she made Lucian capable of. And Lucian, she paused, he didn't stop them. He tried, but he failed. And he's been punishing himself for it ever since. Lenora's heart was hammering. Why are you telling me this? Because someone should, because he won't, and because you deserve to know what you've walked into before the cage door closes. Vivian stood smoothing her dress. She walked to the door, then paused. Ask him about the portrait in the lower gallery, she said. 3rd room on the left, the one with the curtain over it. Then she was gone. Lenora found the portrait at midnight. She moved through the sleeping house with a candle she'd taken from the dining hall, her slippers silent on the stone floors. Down the main staircase, through the lower gallery, past landscapes and battle scenes and portraits of Ashford ancestors. 3rd room on the left, a small chamber, one painting. Covered with a velvet curtain so dark it seemed to absorb the candlelight. She pulled the curtain aside, and her blood went cold. The woman in the portrait could have been her twin. Not exactly. The style was different. The clothing was early 19th century. The hair was swept up in a style 200 years out of fashion. But the face, the jawline, the shape of the eyes, the way the subject held her chin slightly raised, as though daring the painter to look away. A brass plaque at the bottom of the frame read Elise Marchandau, 1802. Lenore stared at the painting until the candle burned down to a stub. Then she walked upstairs, found Lucian's study, and opened the door without knocking. He was sitting at his desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked up. His face betrayed nothing but his eyes. Those cold gray eyes flickered when he saw her expression. You found the portrait, he said. She looks like me. Yes. Was she a mender too? A pause long enough for the fire to crackle and settle. Yes. And the council killed her. Yes. And you couldn't stop them. Lucian set his glass during random. He placed both hands flat on the desk. His fingers were trembling. Barely. but she saw it. I tried, he said. I fought. I killed 3 council members. I burned a treaty that had stood for 500 years, and it wasn't enough. They took her in the day while I slept, while I was helpless. His voice cracked on the last word, a fissure in a wall of granite. I woke up and she was gone, a pile of ash in the courtyard. Lenora felt tears on her cheeks. She wasn't sure when they had started. Am I her replacement? She whispered. Is that why you came? Is that why you kept me? Because I look like a dead woman and my blood does something useful. Lucian stood up. He came around the desk. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough to touch, but not touching. His face was stripped in man's. No mask, no king. Just a man who had been alone for 2 centuries and was terrified of the answer to her question. I don't know, he said. I don't know why I came that night. I don't know why your message felt like a hand reaching out from the dark. I don't know if I'm protecting you or protecting a memory. He swallowed. The sound was audible in the silent room. But I know this. Elise is gone, and you are here, and you are not her. You are braver. You are louder. You walked into a room of vampires and pulled silver from a wound because you couldn't stand to hear someone scream. Elise never did that. Elise was gentle. You are fierce, Mom. He looked at her with eyes that held 300 years of solitude. I don't know what I feel, Lenora, but I know it belongs to you, not to a ghost. Lenora stood in the candlelight, tears drying on her cheeks, and felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first crack in a wall she had built to keep the world out. Don't lie to me again, she said. Not about being bored, not about anything. I won't. And don't you ever call me a complication. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. You are, though. Good night, Lucian. Good night, Lenora. She walked out, and for the first time, the blue room didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a choice. The council came 3 days later. They arrived at dusk, 12 vampires in black cars filing into the grand hall of the Ashford estate like judges entering a courtroom. Aldrich Fell led them his comb-over, immaculate, his smile sharper than the silver blades the order carried. He had spent the week well. Dr. Calloway's report on Lenora's blood had been distributed to every council member. The word mender had traveled through the vampire aristocracy like a virus, and with it a hunger that had nothing to do with blood. A mender's blood could heal silver wounds. A mender's blood properly extracted and processed could make an army invincible, or it could be weaponized, turned into a toxin that would dissolve vampire tissue from the inside out. Lenora Bellamy was the most valuable human being on the planet, and she was currently sleeping in a guest bedroom. Aldrich wanted her. The law is clear, he said, standing at the center of the grand hall, his voice carrying to every corner. The council sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs. Lucian stood at the head, his face carved from stone. A human residing within a vampire estate must be approved by the council, or the human must demonstrate value sufficient to justify the security risk. She is my guest, Lucian said, under my protection. Your protection is not the issue, Aldrich replied, and the courtesy in his voice was as thin as tissue paper. The issue is precedent. If every vampire king sheltered every stray human who stumbled into our world, our secrecy would collapse within a decade. The human must be evaluated, or she must be surrendered to the council for safekeeping. The word safekeeping sat in the air like a coiled snake. You want to cage her, Lucian said quietly. Extract her blood. Use it. I want to protect the coven, Aldrich said. As should you. The hall buzzed with whispered debate. Council members traded glances. The political fault lines were visible, some loyal to Lucian, some seduced by Aldrich's promises, some simply afraid. Lucian opened his mouth to speak. I'll do it. The voice came from the doorway. Lenora Bellamy stood at the entrance to the grand hall wearing the red velvet dress and an expression that could have stopped a charging bull. She had heard the cars arrive. She had listened at the top of the stairs. She had understood enough. She walked into the room. 12 pairs of ancient predatory eyes tracked her movement. She could feel their attention like heat from an open furnace. She stopped in the center of the semicircle. She looked at Aldrich Fell. You want me to prove my value, she said. Fine. Lenora, the Lucian started. I've got this. She didn't look at him. She looked at the council, at 12 creatures who had lived for centuries, who had ruled from shadows, who had built empires on blood and secrecy. You're afraid of me, she said. 12 vampires, some of you older than this country, and you're afraid of a waitress from Elm Street. That tells me more about you than it tells you about me. The room went absolutely still. I know what a mender is, Lenora continued. I've read your own medical text. My blood can heal silver wounds. It's the only thing that can. And right now, from what I've read in Dr. Calloway's case files, you lose an average of 11 vampires per year to silver injuries. 11 lives that could be saved. She paused. Let the number sit. You can cage me, extract my blood, turn me into a resource. And you'll get maybe a few liters before my body gives out because Mender blood doesn't regenerate if the host is under duress. Your own research says that. Page 217. Aldrich's smile faltered. Or Lenora said, you can let me stay, willingly. As a medical practitioner, not a prisoner. I have 2 years of nursing training. I learned fast. I already extracted a silver fragment from one of your guards 3 days ago. He's fully healed. You can ask him. She looked around the room, meeting every pair of eyes. I'm offering you something you can't buy and can't steal. A mender who wants to help. All I'm asking in return is the right to exist. Silence. Lucian stood behind her. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel his presence like a wall of heat at her back. Aldrich looked at the council. We will vote. The vote was 7-5. Lenora stayed. Aldrich's jaw tightened as the final hand was raised. He had lost. Publicly. At the hands of a human woman who had quoted his own research back at him. He caught Lucian's eye across the room. Something passed between them. An understanding that this was not over. That this was in fact just beginning. The week that followed was the closest thing to peace Lenore had known in years. Lucian began to open slowly the way a vault opens one tumbler at a time. He told her about the centuries, not all of them, but pieces, the wars, the plagues, the way time stretches when you live forever, becoming not a river but an ocean flat and featureless, with no shore in sight. Lenora taught him to make pancakes. He had never eaten human food. He didn't need to. But he stood in the vast industrial kitchen of the estate, sleeves rolled up, flour on his fingers, and followed her instructions with the serious concentration of a man defusing a bomb. The first pancake was a disaster, burned black on one side, raw on the other. You lived through the French Revolution, Lenora said, and you can't flip a pancake. The French Revolution was easier, Lucian replied. There were fewer variables. She laughed. It surprised both of them. The sound echoed off the stone walls, bright and strange, and Lucian looked at her as though he was hearing music for the first time. One evening, she changed his bandages. An old wound on his forearm, silver from a skirmish decades ago, that had never fully healed. She unwrapped the gauze with steady hands, cleaned the wound with antiseptic, and applied fresh dressing. When her fingers touched the edge of the scar, the tissue shimmered. The wound, which had been an angry red for 30 years, faded to pink, then to white, then to nothing. They both stared at his arm. It's gone, Lucian whispered. Lenora looked at her hands. I didn't do anything. I just touched it. Mender blood, he said. It doesn't just work through transfusion. It works through contact. He looked at her. She looked at him. The air between them was charged heavy with something neither of them was ready to name. We should be careful, he said softly. Too late for that, she replied. They were not careful enough. At 3:17 in the morning, 3 weeks after Lenora Bellamy texted the wrong number, the perimeter sensors of the Ashford estate activated. Lenora was asleep in the blue room. Lucian was in his study reading. Whitmore was in the kitchen, performing his nightly inventory. The first explosion shook the house to its foundations. A silver charge detonated at the main gate, ripped the iron apart like paper. The blast wave shattered every window on the ground floor, sending a cascade of glass into the foyer like a crystalline avalanche. Lucian was at the window in a heartbeat. He looked out into the darkness. Floodlights blazed across the grounds, illuminating figures moving through the breach. Tactical gear, silver weapons, military precision, the order. Behind them a second wave, vampires. Aldrich's loyalists moving in formation, flanking the human hunters. A coalition of enemies united by greed. And at the rear, limping but upright, his broken arms still in a cast, pointing toward the house with his good hand, Kyle Daggett. Lucian's phone buzzed. A text from Aldrich fell. Apologies, my lord. The council has reconsidered. Lucian looked at the message. His face didn't change, but his eyes went dark. The gray bled away, replaced by something ancient and black, and absolutely without mercy. He pressed the intercom. Whitmore, code black, protect the mender. I'm going downstairs. Then he walked to the grand staircase, adjusted his cuffs, and descended into the war. Lenora woke to the sound of the world ending. The explosion hit the house like a fist, shaking the walls, rattling the windows, sending the crystal carafe on her bedside table crashing to the floor. She was out of bed before the glass finished breaking, bare feet hitting cold stone, her hands already reaching for something to hold on to. The second blast was closer, deeper. She felt it in her teeth. The blue room's windows shattered inward. Lenora threw her arms over her face and dropped to the floor as glass sprayed across the room like shrapnel, shards embedded in the velvet wallpaper. The curtains billowed inward, torn, letting in the smell of smoke and rain, and something chemical sharp and metallic like pennies left on a hot stove. Silver. She recognized the smell from the medical text. She crawled to the wardrobe, pulled on shoes, grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, a brass candlestick from the mantelpiece, and moved to the door. Whitmore was already there. He stood in the corridor, his butler's composure cracked for the first time since she'd known him. His tie was askew. There was a cut on his forehead, leaking blood that was too dark to be human. "Miss Bellamy, you need to come with me now." "What's happening?" "The estate is under attack, Mr. Ashford is engaging the threat. My orders are to keep you safe." Below them through the floor, Lenore heard sounds that would live in her nightmares for years. The crack of gunfire, the shriek of metal on stone, and underneath it all, a snarling, low guttural and vast that was not a sound any human throat could produce. "Where is he?" Lenore demanded. "Downstairs. Miss Bellamy, please." "Is he alone?" Whitmore's jaw tightened. "He has the loyal guard. But the attackers there are hunters and vampires working together. Aldrich Fell has turned the council. This was planned." Another explosion, closer. The chandelier in the corridor swayed violently, crystals clinking like wind chimes in a hurricane. Lenore made a decision. It was not the safe decision. It was not the smart decision. It was the decision of a woman who had spent 4 years being protected by no one and had finally found someone worth protecting back. "Take me to the medical wing," she said. "Miss Bellamy." Whitmore. Her voice was the clinical voice, the one that had commanded vampires. "There are going to be wounded, probably already are. Dr. Calloway is compromised. She reported my blood to Aldrich, which means she's either a traitor or a hostage. Either way, there is no doctor in this house right now. There's me. Take me to the medical wing." Whitmore stared at her for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. They moved through the house at speed. The quarters that had been silent and elegant 3 hours ago were transformed. Smoke drifted along the ceiling. Emergency lights cast everything in a red wash. Twice Lenora heard footsteps that weren't theirs running fast and human, and Whitmore pressed her against the wall, shielding her with his body until the sound passed. They reached the medical wing. It was intact. The reinforced walls had held. Whitmore punched a code into the keypad, and the door hissed open. Inside, 2 wounded vampires were already on gurneys brought in by guards who looked barely better off. Silver burns, shrapnel wounds. One had a piece of rebar through his thigh. Lenore didn't hesitate. She washed her hands. She pulled on gloves. She went to work. She worked the way she had been trained to work 2 years ago and 3 lifetimes ago in a classroom where the simulations were fake, but the skills were real. Triage first. Stabilize the worst. Stop the bleeding. Remove the silver. The vampire with the rebar was screaming. She talked to him the way she would talk to any patient, firm, calm, constant. "Look at me. I need you to breathe. I know it hurts. I'm going to count to 3, and then I'm going to pull this out. Do not move. 1, 2. She pulled on 2. She had learned that trick from a paramedic at Ridgemont. If you tell them 3, they tense up at 3. You go on 2 when they're still bracing. The rebar came free. Blood, dark, thick, not quite human, poured from the wound. Lenora packed it with gauze, applied pressure, and reached for the suture kit. More wounded arrived. A stream of broken bodies carried through the reinforced door. She moved between gurneys, her slippers soaked in blood that wasn't red, her nightgown stained beyond saving. She extracted silver fragments with tweezers. She sutured wounds that would have killed a human 3 times over. She talked constantly because silence in a trauma ward was the sound of giving up. Whitmore watched her. So did the guards. So did every conscious vampire in the room. They watched a human woman with broken ribs and bare hands hold their world together with gauze and willpower. 2 floors below Lucian Ashford was a hurricane. The foyer of the estate was a ruin. The grand staircase was cracked down the center. The marble floor was carpeted with broken glass, overturned furniture, and bodies. Some were hunters in tactical black. Some were vampires in council gray. All were still. Lucian moved through them like a force of nature. He was not fighting the way humans fight, with calculation, with strategy, with the measured application of violence. He was fighting the way a storm fights. Instinct and fury and 3 centuries of predatory evolution condensed into a body that was faster than sight and stronger than steel. A hunter raised a silver crossbow. Lucian closed the distance in a blink, snapped the weapon in half, and threw the man through a wall. Two council vampires lunged from opposite sides. Lucian caught one by the throat, used him as a shield against the other, and then drove both into the stone floor with a force that cracked the marble beneath them. But they kept coming. Aldrich had planned well. The hunters carried silver-tipped ammunition, the only thing that could genuinely hurt a vampire of Lucian's age. And they weren't aiming to kill with each shot. They were aiming to bleed, to weaken, to drain him by 1,000 cuts. A silver bolt caught Lucian in the left shoulder. He ripped it out without slowing, but the wound didn't close. It burned, silver toxicity spreading through the tissue like acid eating at him from the inside. Another bolt, right thigh. He stumbled, kept moving, killed the archer with a backhand that sent the man's body spinning across the foyer. A third bolt, left side, between the ribs. Lucian dropped to one knee. The pain was a white-hot wire threaded through his chest. Silver in the bloodstream, silver eating at the tissue around his heart. His vision blurred at the edges. His hands shook. He had not been this badly wounded in over a century. Aldrich fell emerged from the smoke. He was pristine, untouched. He had stayed behind his soldiers, letting them absorb the cost, letting them soften the king before he made his entrance. He was wearing a new suit. His comb-over was impeccable. "You look tired, Lucian," Aldrich said, stopping 10 feet away. Behind him, a semicircle of loyal vampires formed a wall. 300 years, and this is how it ends. On your knees, over a human. Lucian looked up. His eyes were black. Not the gray that darkened to charcoal, fully, completely black, the way the ocean looks at midnight. "She is not just a human," Lucian rasped. "No," Aldrich agreed. "She's a mender, a resource, one you would have wasted on sentiment. The council has voted Lucian, 11 to 1. Your regency is over." "The council didn't vote. You bought them. The way you buy everything." Aldrich smiled. "Does it matter?" He gestured. Two of his guards stepped forward carrying silver chains. "Restrain him. We'll deal with the transfer of power after dawn. As for the mender, bring her to me. Alive. I want the blood undamaged." Lucian tried to rise. His left leg buckled. The silver in his system was shutting down his muscles one by one, a slow paralysis that crept outward from every wound. He was going to lose. For the second time in his existence, he was going to lose someone in this house because he wasn't strong enough to stop it. Elise, he thought, not again. Then a voice cut through the smoke. "Get away from him." Lenora stood at the top of the ruined staircase. She was covered in blood. None of it was hers. Her nightgown was torn. Her hair was wild. She was holding a surgical kit in one hand and a bag of plasma in the other. She looked like a field medic who had wandered out of a war zone, which in a sense she was. She had left the medical wing when the stream of wounded stopped. Not because the fighting was over, but because the guards carrying the wounded had stopped coming, which meant either the battle was won or the people carrying the wounded were dead. She had followed the sound of combat, through the smoke, down the shattered staircase, into the ruin of the foyer, and she had found Lucian on his knees with silver in his blood and a traitor standing over him. Aldrich felt turned to look at her. His expression was the expression of a man who has found a butterfly on his windshield, mildly annoyed, faintly amused. "Ah," he said, "the mender, you've saved me the trouble of fetching you." "I said get away from him." "Or what?" Aldrich tilted his head. "You'll bleed on me." Lenora walked down the stairs. Her hands were steady. Her ribs were screaming. She had been on her feet for 2 hours lifting, pulling, working, but she had rediscovered something in the medical wing that Kyle Daggett had spent 4 years trying to beat out of her. She was not helpless. She had never been helpless. She had been trapped and tired and alone. But helpless was a word for people who had nothing to offer, and Lenora Bellamy had hands that could heal what nothing else could. She reached the bottom of the stairs. She walked past Aldrich's guards, who watched her with the bewildered stillness of predators encountering prey that refused to run. She knelt beside Lucian. His skin was gray, not the elegant pale of a vampire, a sick ashen gray. The silver wounds were spreading, black veins spidering out from each entry point, creeping toward his chest. "How many bolts?" she asked. "3. His voice was a rasp. "Left shoulder, right thigh, left side. The one in your side is closest to the heart. That's the one that's killing you." "I'm aware." She opened the surgical kit. Her hands moved with the automatic precision of training so deeply embedded it had survived 4 years of abuse and neglect. She found the tweezers, the antiseptic, the gauze. "This is going to hurt," she said. "Everything you do hurts," Lucian whispered. But his eyes found hers, and in the black depths she saw something she hadn't expected. Trust. Lenora probed the wound in his side. The silver bolt had fragmented on entry 3 pieces embedded in the intercostal muscles between his 6th and 7th ribs. She could feel them with the tweezers hot and jagged, pulsing with a dull silver light. She extracted the first fragment. Lucian hissed through his teeth but didn't move. The second, deeper. She had to press harder, and the sound he made was animal and raw. "One more," she said. "Breathe." "I don't breathe." "Then hold still." She went deep. Found the last fragment lodged against the pleural wall millimeters from his heart. She gripped it, pulled. It came free with a wet sucking sound, and Lucian exhaled a sound like a dam breaking. But the damage was done. The silver had been in his system too long. The black veins were still spreading. The wounds weren't closing. His body was shutting down. Lenora looked at her hands, covered in his blood, dark, thick, cold. She thought of the guard whose wound had healed when she touched it. She thought of Lucian's scar that vanished under her fingers. She thought of every page of Dr. Calloway's research she had memorized in the library and the one line that had burned itself into her mind. Mender blood administered through direct contact with compromised tissue can accelerate regeneration by a factor of 40. The host must give willingly. Blood taken by force carries no healing properties. She looked at Lucian. "I'm going to do something," she said, "and you're going to let me." "Lenora." She took the scalpel from the surgical kit. She drew it across her left palm. A clean cut, deep enough to bleed freely. The pain was sharp and immediate, a thin, bright line that cut through the fog of adrenaline. Her blood welled up, red, warm, alive. She pressed her bleeding palm against the wound in Lucian's side. The reaction was instantaneous, light. Not the cold silver glow of toxicity, something warmer. Golden. It pulsed from the point of contact, spreading through the black veins like dawn breaking across a poisoned sky. The darkness retreated, the tissue knit. The wound closed, new skin forming over raw flesh like water flowing over stone. Lucian gasped, his back arched. His hands gripped the broken marble floor so hard his fingers left gouges in the stone. The light spread to the shoulder wound. Closed it, moved to the thigh. Closed that too. And then it kept going, deeper, into his blood, into his bones. Lenora felt it, a pull like her blood was being drawn through her skin by a current flowing into him, healing him, filling the cracks that 300 years had carved into his body. It was too much. She tried to pull her hand away. She couldn't. Her vision tunneled. The room spun. She was giving too much. Her body was a vessel being drained, and if she didn't stop, Lucian's hand closed over hers. He pulled her palm away from his skin, gently, firmly. He sat up, his wounds healed, his eyes clearing from black to gray, and he looked at her with an expression that held more emotion than she had seen in his face in 3 weeks. "Enough," he said. "Lenora, enough." She swayed. He caught her. His arms were warm now, not cold, not the permanent winter of undead flesh, but warm with her blood running through his veins. "I'm okay," she said. She wasn't. Her head was swimming. But she was conscious, and he was healed, and that was enough. "I didn't take it," Lucian said. His voice was fierce, desperate. "You gave it. Tell me you know that." "I know." "I would never I know, Lucian. I gave it because I chose to. Not because you asked. Not because you needed it. Because I chose." He looked at her. The king of the city, the apex predator, the 300-year-old monster, looked at a 26-year-old waitress from Elm Street as though she had just rearranged the stars. "Now get up," Lenora said, "and finish this." Lucian rose. The effect of Mender blood on a vampire of his age was something the medical texts had theorized about but never observed. It was not simply healing, it was amplification. Every sense sharpened, every muscle surged. His body, which had been operating at the baseline of immortal capability for 3 centuries, suddenly remembered what it was like to burn at full power. He felt the heartbeat of every person in the room. He heard the rasp of Aldrich's breath 6 rooms away. He smelled the silver on the hunters' weapons and the fear in their sweat. Aldrich Fell had retreated the moment the golden light erupted from Lenora's hand. He had recognized it. He had read the same texts. And he knew with the cold certainty of a mathematician watching an equation resolve that he had approximately 90 seconds before Lucian Ashford came for him. He ran. He didn't get far. Lucian moved through the ruined estate like a shadow thrown by lightning. The loyal guards, 6 of them, the ones who had held the line while their king fell, cleared a path. The hunters who remained standing dropped their weapons and put their hands up. They were soldiers, not zealots. They could smell the change in the air. Aldrich made it to the east wing before Lucian caught him. The vampire king didn't run. He walked, each step deliberate, each step echoing through the stone corridor with the weight of a sentence being handed down. Aldrich turned. His back was against the wall. His composure, the smug political composure he had worn like armor for 2 centuries, was gone. Underneath it was something small and pale and afraid. Lucianut, he said, let's discuss this. I was protecting the coven. The mender is too valuable to be left in the hands of... You tried to take her. I tried to secure a resource. You tried to take her. Lucian's voice was quiet. The quiet before the ground opens. You aligned with hunters. You sold the location of my estate to humans who carry silver weapons. You compromised the secrecy of our kind. You violated every oath you swore when you took your council seat. He stopped 3 feet from Aldrich. And you called her a resource. Aldrich's mouth opened. No sound came out. Lucian raised his hand. His fingers were steady. His eyes were gray and clear and absolutely without pity. And then from behind him a voice. Don't kill him. Lenora was there, leaning against the wall of the corridor, pale, one hand pressed against her side where her ribs throbbed, the other holding the brass candlestick she had grabbed a lifetime ago. She had followed him. Of course she had. He deserves it, Lucian said, not turning around. Probably, but killing him makes you a tyrant. Punishing him makes you a king. She paused, breathed through the pain. Prove why you're the one sitting on the throne, Lucian. Not because you're the strongest, because you're the best. Lucian stood still for a long time. The corridor was silent except for Aldrich's ragged breathing and the distant sound of the rain. Then he lowered his hand. Aldrich fell, Lucian said. You are stripped of your council seat. Your assets are frozen. Your territories are dissolved. You are sentenced to exile. Not death, something worse. He leaned close. Silence. You will live in a place where no one knows your name. No one answers your calls. No court, no council, no audience. You will live for centuries with nothing but the memory of the power you threw away because you thought a waitress from Elm Street was beneath you. Aldrich's face crumbled. Take him, Lucian said to the guards who had appeared behind him. Now. They dragged Aldrich away. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. The silence of his sentence had already begun. Lenora found Kyle in the garden. She hadn't been looking for him. She was walking through the aftermath, helping the wounded, directing the guards to carry the injured to the medical wing. The rain had stopped. The first gray light of dawn was creeping over the eastern wall of the estate, and the grounds looked like a battlefield from a history book, cratered, smoking, littered with debris. Kyle was sitting against the garden wall, his broken arm cradled in his lap, a silver pistol lying in the mud beside him. He had been given the gun by Rook. He had been told to find Lenora. He had been told to finish what he started. He hadn't fired a single shot. Because when the explosions began, and the vampires started fighting and the screaming started, Kyle Daggett had discovered something about himself that all bullies eventually discover. He was a coward. He was brave in kitchens and bathrooms and apartments where the only witness was a woman half his size. But in a war surrounded by creatures that could tear him apart without effort, he was nothing. A small, drunk, broken man sitting in the mud. He looked up and saw Lenora standing above him. She was covered in blood. Her nightgown was destroyed. There were dark circles under her eyes and a bruise on her forehead from a piece of falling plaster. She looked nothing like the woman he had controlled for 4 years. She looked like someone he didn't recognize. Nora, he whispered. He used the name he had always used, the diminutive, the leash. Don't call me that. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this. I just wanted... You wanted me back. Lenora's voice was flat, empty of anger, empty of fear, empty of everything she had once felt for him, which was the most terrifying thing Kyle Daggett had ever experienced. You wanted me back in that apartment, on that floor, waiting for you to decide whether tonight was a good night or a bad night. I loved you, Kyle said, and he might have even believed it. No, you owned me. There's a difference. I know that now. She looked at the silver pistol in the mud. She looked at Kyle's cast. She looked at the man who had broken her ribs and nearly killed her, and then sold her location to a paramilitary organization because he couldn't stand the idea that she had escaped. I'm not afraid of you anymore, Kyle. You're just a man with a broken arm and no one left to hit. She turned and walked away. Behind her, 2 of Lucian's guards materialized from the shadows and lifted Kyle Daggett to his feet. He didn't resist. There was nothing left in him to resist with. Lenora didn't look back. It was Sawyer who arrived at noon. Whitmore had contacted him 12 hours earlier at Lucian's instruction and sent a car. Sawyer Bellamy, 6'1", 2 tours in Afghanistan, built like a man who had been tested by the worst the world could offer, and had passed, walked through the shattered gates of the Ashford estate, looked at the craters and the broken glass and the dark stains on the gravel, and said exactly one word. Nora. She ran to him. She hadn't run in weeks, her ribs wouldn't allow it, but she ran now across the gravel drive and threw herself into her brother's arms with a force that made both of them gasp. He held her. He didn't speak. He just held her, his chin on top of her head, his arms locked around her, and let her shake. "I'm okay," she said into his chest. "I'm okay, Sawyer. You're covered in blood. It's not mine, most of it." He pulled back. He looked at her face, the fading bruise, the healing lip, the new cut on her forehead, and underneath it all, something he hadn't seen in her eyes for 4 years. Strength. "Where is he?" Sawyer asked. His voice carried the quiet promise that had made Kyle Daggett back away from his door. "The one who did this to you." "Which one, either?" "Kyle is in custody. He'll be turned over to the police with enough evidence to put him away." She paused. "The other one, the one who saved me, is inside." Sawyer looked up at the Gothic manor looming above them. His expression said everything. "It's a long story," Lenora said. "I've got time." Lucian appeared in the doorway. He had changed into a clean suit. His wounds were healed, though a faint shadow lingered under his eyes, the only trace of the night's violence. He looked at Sawyer with the measured assessment of a man who recognized a fellow predator. Sawyer looked back with the expression of a man who didn't care how old, rich, or powerful you were if you had hurt his sister. "You must be the brother," Lucian said, "and you must be the wrong number." A beat. Then Lucian extended his hand. Sawyer took it. The handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough to communicate respect, short enough to communicate that the jury was still out. "Take care of her," Sawyer said. It was not a request. "I intend to. And if you don't, I don't care what you are. I'll find a way." Lucian almost smiled. "I believe you." The truth about the phone number came to light 3 days later. Whitmore discovered it. He had been conducting a forensic analysis of the night's events, cataloging the damage, the casualties, the chain of intelligence that had led Rook in the order to the estate. During the process, he had traced the phone number that Lenore had texted. He brought the findings to Lucian's study. "The number, sir, 5505199. What about it?" "It was decommissioned in 1987. It hasn't been active in nearly 40 years. By all accounts, a text message sent to that number should have bounced. It should have returned an error notification to the sender." Lucian set down his pen. "But it didn't." "No, sir, it delivered directly to your current device." "That's not possible. My current number is entirely different." "I know, sir." Whitmore paused. The old vampire's face held something Lenora would have recognized as the same expression he wore when she had identified Dr. Calloway from a 100-year-old photograph. Recognition, wonder, a touch of fear. "The number, sir, 5550199. I checked it against our historical records." He placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. "It was registered in 1802 to a resident of this estate." Lucian looked at the paper. His face went very still. "The number belonged to the household line of this property, the line that was used exclusively by the occupant of the Blue Room." A long silence. "It was Elise's number," Lucian whispered. "Yes, sir, it was Elise Marchand's number. The line she used to communicate with you when you were away from the estate. It was disconnected after her death in 1824 and never reassigned." Lucian stared at the paper. His hands, which had been steady through a battle and a century of solitude, trembled. "A message sent to a dead woman's number," he said slowly, "delivered to me 200 years later. I have no explanation, sir. The telecom records show no forwarding, no rerouting, no technical pathway by which that message should have reached you." Lucian stood. He walked to the window. The garden below was scarred from the attack, but the oak trees still stood. They had stood for 300 years. They would stand for 300 more. "She sent her to me," he said quietly. "Elise. Somehow, she sent her to me." Whitmore said nothing. Some things were beyond the reach of even the most loyal servant's counsel. Lucian found Lenora in the library. She was reading as usual. A text on advanced wound care bookmarked and annotated in her small, precise handwriting. She looked up when he entered, and something in his face made her set the book down. "What is it?" he told her. He told her about the number, about Elise, about the impossible delivery of a message through a deadline to a living phone across 2 centuries of silence. Lenora listened. Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't fall. She had learned in the past 3 weeks that tears were for grief, and this wasn't grief. This was something else, something larger. "Maybe it wasn't a wrong number," she said. "No," Lucian agreed. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe she knew, wherever she is. Maybe she knew you were alone and she knew I was in trouble, and she found a way. Lucian sat beside her, not across a 20-foot dining table, not behind a desk, beside her on the leather sofa in the library, close enough that their shoulders touched. I spent 200 years believing I failed her, he said, that I wasn't fast enough, wasn't strong enough. You didn't fail her, Lucian. You just weren't finished yet. He turned to look at her, this woman. This impossible, stubborn, brilliant, bruised woman who had walked into his world through a crack in a phone screen and refused to leave. He took her hand. His skin was warm, still warm from her blood. He pressed his lips to her palm, right over the cut that had healed to a thin white line, right over the lifeline. Thank you, he said, for texting the wrong number. Thank you for answering. 6 months later, the Ashford estate had been rebuilt. The gates were new, taller, reinforced with alloys that wouldn't shatter under a silver charge. The gardens had been replanted, the windows replaced. The foyer floor cracked and stained with the blood of a night that had nearly ended. Everything had been relaid in fresh marble. But the house felt different, not because of the renovations, because the curtains were open. For the first time in 3 centuries, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Ashford estate, filling the corridors with warmth. Lucian didn't need it. Sunlight didn't harm vampires, that was another myth. But he had kept the curtains drawn for 200 years because the light reminded him of things he had lost. Lenora had opened them on her 2nd month in the house. She had walked through every room, pulled back every curtain, and let the sun in. Enough darkness, she had said. And that was that. She was no longer in the blue room. She had moved to the east wing, into a suite. She had chosen herself close to the library and the medical wing. Her closet was half velvet dresses and half medical scrubs. She wore the scrubs more. She had gone back to school, not Ridgemont Community College, a private program funded through a scholarship that Whitmore had arranged with a discretion so total that Lenora would never find Lucian's name on any document. The program was unique, a medical training track designed for practitioners who would serve the supernatural community. Lenora was its first and only student. She was top of her class, again, as she had always been. Dr. Calloway was gone. She had been given a choice Excel with Aldrich or testimony before the council in exchange for leniency. She chose testimony. She was now practicing in a clinic in Eastern Europe, far from the Ashford estate, far from the woman whose blood she had betrayed. Lenora didn't hate her. She understood the chain of command. She understood fear. But she didn't forgive her either. Some things take longer than 6 months. Aldrich Fell lived in a cottage in northern Scotland. Alone, no phone, no visitors, no power. The council had enforced Lucian's sentence to the letter. Aldrich, who had once commanded rooms with his voice, now spoke only to the wind. The punishment was exquisite in its cruelty, not violence, not death, but irrelevance. For a man who had craved attention like oxygen, silence was a suffocation that would last for centuries. Kyle Daggett was in a state penitentiary, 8 years. Aggravated assault, domestic battery, illegal weapons possession, and conspiracy charges connected to his involvement with the order. Rook had vanished, and the order had fractured without his leadership, scattering into cells that Lucian's people were dismantling one by one. Kyle sat in a cell. No one visited, no one wrote. The woman he had tried to own had become someone he couldn't reach, couldn't touch, couldn't even comprehend. She lived in a mansion. She healed vampires. She stood beside a king. And she had done it not because anyone had given it to her, but because she had earned every single inch of it with her own 2 hands. Vivian Duval had left the country the morning after the attack. She had not participated in the violence. She had not helped Aldrich. But she had known, and she had stayed silent, and that silence carried a weight she could not put down. Before she left, she slipped an envelope under Lenora's door, inside a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was elegant, centuries old. He loved Elise, but Elise was gentle and the world broke her. You are not gentle. You are a storm. Take care of him. I couldn't. Lenora kept the letter in the drawer of her bedside table. She read it once a week, not for comfort, for perspective. On a Tuesday evening in October, Lenora was in the medical wing reviewing case files. She had treated 14 vampires and 3 lichens in the past month, silver extractions, blood compatibility consultations, a werewolf with a broken femur that wouldn't set because of a rare silver alloy contamination. She had solved it by developing a saline flush infused with trace amounts of her own blood, diluted, controlled, administered with clinical precision. The femur healed in 6 hours. She had published the protocol. Anonymously, it was now standard practice in 3 covens across the country. Lucian found her at her desk, surrounded by charts and coffee cups. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her the way he had watched her on the first night, with an intensity that could have powered a city. You're working late. I'm always working late. You should eat. You should eat. When's the last time you fed? A pause. Tuesday. It's Tuesday. Last Tuesday. Lenora set down her pen. She looked at him. 6 months ago, she had been a waitress on a bathroom floor. Now she was looking at the king of the city's supernatural order with the expression of a woman who was not impressed by crowns. Have you eaten my pancakes? She asked. Your pancakes are a crime against flour. My pancakes are perfect, and you know it. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was as close to a grin as Lucian Ashford ever got. Come upstairs, he said. I have something to show you. He led her to the library. On the desk where her medical text usually sat there was a small velvet box. If that's a ring, we need to have a conversation about pacing, Lenora said. It's not a ring. She opened it. Inside, on a bed of black silk, was a silver key, old, ornate, engraved with a symbol she recognized from the estate's crest. It's the master key, Lucian said. It opens every door in this house, every room, every vault, every archive, every secret I have. Lenora looked at the key, then at him. You're giving me access to everything. I'm giving you a choice. You can stay as a guest, protected, comfortable, or you can stay as an equal, with full knowledge of what this house contains, what this world requires, and what it will cost. What will it cost? Everything. It always does. Lenora lifted the key from the box. It was heavy, cold. It warmed in her hand. I was a waitress 6 months ago, she said. Before that, I was a nursing student. Before that, I was a girl from a family that didn't have much. I've never had a key to anything worth locking. She closed her fist around it. But I've never been afraid of doors. Lucian exhaled. It was a sound she had never heard him make before. Relief, pure unguarded relief. There's one more thing, he said. Of course there is. Your phone, betrayal. He held it up, the shattered screen, the device she had carried from the bathroom floor, through the rain, through the war. He had kept it. It received a message this morning. He handed it to her. She looked at the screen, a text from an unknown number. Please help me. He won't let me leave. Lenora's breath caught. She read the message again. The desperate grammar. The abbreviated panic. The echo of her own words sent from a different floor in a different city by a different woman trapped in the same nightmare. She looked up at Lucian. Can you trace this number? Already done. Apartment complex on the south side. 14th floor. How far? 20 minutes. Lenora set down the key. She picked up her coat. Then let's go. Lucian smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that showed the tips of his elongated canines and crinkled the corners of his ancient eyes, and made him look for just a moment like a man who had found a reason to keep going. I'll drive, he said. They walked out together, through the sunlit corridors, past the open curtains, down the grand staircase that had been rebuilt from the rubble. The Aston Martin was waiting in the drive. Lucian opened the passenger door. Lenora slid in. He rounded the car, climbed behind the wheel, and started the engine. As the car pulled away from the estate, Lenora looked at the shattered phone one last time. The screen was cracked beyond repair. But the message was clear. She had texted the wrong number, and it had led her to exactly the right place. And that is the story of how a broken phone and a single wrong digit rewrote the fate of a waitress, a king, in a world that exists just beneath the skin of the one you know. Lenora Bellamy went from a victim on a linoleum floor to the healer of a kingdom. Not because she was chosen, not because she was rescued, but because when the universe sent her a door, she walked through it with both hands open and refused to stop. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? We carry these devices in our pockets every day, connected to 8 billion people. One typo, one slip of the thumb, and your desperate plea could land in the inbox of a delivery driver, a grandmother, or a 300-year-old king who has been waiting 2 centuries for someone brave enough to need him. Lucian Ashford was not a good man. He said so himself many times in many ways. But sometimes when the world is full of real-life monsters, the ones who smile at you in kitchens and lock the doors behind you, a good man isn't what you need. You need a protector who owns the dark. And sometimes the dark needs a protector too. Check the number before you hit send, or maybe just maybe don't.